Good morning. My name is Suzanne Klein, and I am the co-chair of Congregation Darchei Noam Social Justice and Advocacy Committee, one of the sponsors of this morning's program. On behalf of the committee and of the congregation, I want to welcome you to our morning's program, Supporting African Refugees Today, an information session and a call to action. Our ancient sages, the rabbis, in discussing which was better, study or action, concluded that study was preferable because it led to action. Presumably, to informed and focused action, and that's what we hope will result from our program today. But first, a little housekeeping. This program is being recorded. It will be available after a few days. The link will be on the congregation's website, darcheinoam, one word, .ca. If you know anybody who would be interested, direct them to it. Secondly, we've reserved time to answer questions. Please post them in the chat directed to Danny Shield. He will organize them and try to get as many asked and answered as possible. But we've already prepared answers to two of these, and they will be posted on the screen. One of those questions is, what can I do to help? And the second, where can I get more information, will not only be posted on the screen, but will be in the chat. And now let's move on to our program. I'm delighted to introduce today's moderator, Myra Simutiki. Meyer is a retired professor of politics at Ryerson University and was the founding director of Ryerson's graduate program in immigration and settlement studies. Meyer will introduce the panel. And now over to you, Meyer.
Thank you very much, Suzanne, and special good morning and thanks to everyone who is with us now for this very urgent discussion. We're here to explore how Canada and Canadians can act to alleviate the alarming humanitarian, human rights, and refugee crisis that is unfolding in Afghanistan. We have a superb panel of experts to guide us. In the interest of time, I will be very brief in introducing our presenters, but I think you'll find that their own words and thoughts will best confirm their qualifications and their commitments. As you've heard, I'll be in conversation with each presenter, and then we will turn to a Q&A thereafter. First up will be Hila Taraky. Hila is an Afghan-Canadian lawyer practicing in Hamilton and a leading force behind the new organization, Lifeline Afghanistan, that you'll be hearing about. I have to say I was very fortunate to know Hila when she was a student in that immigration studies program at Ryerson. Speaking next will be Naomi Alboim. Naomi is known to many of us as a member of our congregation. Naomi is a former Ontario Deputy Minister who holds currently 2 university positions. She is the Senior Policy Fellow in Migration and Integration at Ryerson, and she is Distinguished Fellow in the School of Policy Studies at Queen's University. Our final speaker will be Jodi. Jodi is the Manager of Community Engagement at JIAS, the Jewish Immigrant Aid Services, one of Toronto's largest immigrant settlement agencies, and as we'll hear, one of its oldest and long-standing such agency. So we have terrific presenters. We have a lot of ground to cover, important tasks before us. Let's get started. So Hila Taraky, welcome to this program and initiative. And I have to say, really, we owe our gathering to you because you have done so much bringing attention to all Canadians of the crisis that's unfolding in Afghanistan. So Hila, to get us started, I wonder if you could briefly tell us a little bit about your own family's journey from Afghanistan to Canada. When and under what circumstances did your family come to Canada? And I'll ask you to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you for having me, Meyer, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to speak. I do think it's important to have lived experience inform our action and our interest in this crisis and in alleviating some of the issues flowing from this humanitarian crisis. So I'm by profession, I'm a business and land development lawyer. I'm also a Ryerson alumni, and I've had the privilege of being supervised by Meyer during my Ryerson days. But I've always maintained an interest in the economic integration of immigrants and refugees in Canada. And so while my day-to-day was not intertwined with immigration and refugee-related issues, I maintained that interest by serving on boards and bringing to light the lived experiences of immigrants and refugees to all kinds of work. So I'll tell you a little bit about my own family's journey. We came to Canada in 1998. Before that, we lived in Uzbekistan for 7 years as refugees without status. And my parents fled Afghanistan in 1991. And they fled because of the rise of the Mujahideen. So they saw Kabul crumble and their country dissipate, just as we are seeing the same thing happen again by the Taliban. So, you know, being educated and having degrees and experience of living abroad, they knew that the situation would become bleak quickly. So my father sent my mother away with 3 babies. I was 3, my brother was 2, and my sister was a newborn. And she made the journey by land to Uzbekistan. And the reason why we went to Uzbekistan was because we had an uncle who was in medical school there. But I want to talk a little bit more about what caused the move, like some of the raw experiences that hopefully are not too traumatic for you, but basically have shaped our lives here in Canada. You know, my experience as a 3.5-year-old, I have very select few memories that are very vivid from our escape from Kabul. But they really paint a picture about the experiences that people are going through today. And when I think back as a child, like I have memories of being in a bathtub, in a dark washroom in a bathtub with a bunch of other children. And, you know, the memory is weird and strange. But when I ask my parents about what would cause for me to think of that or remember that, and you know, the explanation is really difficult to digest. And that was, you know, what they did when Kabul was being bombed, the rockets were flying in, they would decide whose home was best positioned to avoid the rockets that were being launched that day. And the washrooms had tubs in them, and the hope was that if there was a strike into the apartment, all the babies and children would be in that bathtub and they would have you know, a better chance at surviving the blast. So that was you know, memories like that are really difficult to make sense of right now. You know, or memories like, you know, being told to stay away from the windows and the balcony because we shouldn't be seeing what's going on out there. And being a curious kid, of course, I'm going to go to the balcony and see what's going on out there. And, you know, witnessing people getting shot or, you know, beautiful memories that are marked with terrible things as well. I have a vivid memory of my father playing soccer on a lush green field, and I'm playing with my brother with some flowers. And all of a sudden there's blast and smoke is coming to get him. and my father is just running towards us, and he grabs us by the back of our shirts, and we're just being swung around, trying to escape the debris and the awfulness. So there's many vivid memories, but what I will say is that the experience is that which is pretty shielded. Like when I share this stuff with my mother, she says, you know what, that's awful, but I was successful in hiding the true gory gruesomeness from you. You know, you did not see the bodies and you did not see the awfulness. So experiences like that have really painted our experience in our life in Canada. And while my day job is a pretty normal one, you know, I work with developers, and my expertise is contract drafting. So, you know, that's the type of stuff I enjoy. That's the one part of me. And then the other part is this person who, you know, really appreciates and understands that being here and breathing this air and having these opportunities as a woman is a blessing and something that very few have. Sorry.
I was just going to jump in to say those are such powerful, stark memories that you've shared with us, and I think we've all been moved by what we've heard. I wonder how that connects to what you know about the current state of affairs in Kabul and in the country. It seems to be changing very rapidly and dramatically. We're getting imprecise news coverage out of Afghanistan now. What do you know about the current situation there?
That's a really good question. I mean, all of those experiences were reignited in a way. As of August 15th, when the Taliban took over, I was kind of pushed into the space again. And our involvement with Afghanistan did not cease after immigrating to Canada. Both my parents are academics, and they spent almost a decade going back and forth between Canada and Kabul, trying to strengthen the educational system there, and specifically working with women activists. So my mom's field of research is gender studies and feminist research, and she built a fleet of these women's studies programs at universities, which brought together judges, prosecutors, journalists, and women's rights activists, people who were invested in strengthening the regime that's there, but really pushing the population ahead when it comes to issues of women's rights. So once the Taliban took over on the 15th, from the 15th to the 26th, this idea of an evacuation and rescue mission was very much alive. And so my family was really knocking on all doors to try to identify and help rescue those individuals who would no longer have a future in Afghanistan. And these are people who, you know, publicly opined on issues of sexuality, gender expression, things that were already very risque topics pre-Taliban. And so these individuals we knew would not be able to survive this wave. But the threats of the attacks at the airport halted that effort. And so we had to reposition ourselves. In doing that work, I am in touch with 150 Afghan professionals from across disciplines who are affiliated with these programs via WhatsApp. And we are doing everything from hearing the blow by blow of what's happening on the ground, attending to their immediate needs, like spending tens and thousands of dollars trying to feed people who had great livelihoods before. So I can definitely shed light on what is going on, and I'll just share a few examples. You know, the fleet of women who were prosecutors, they worked in government, they were lawyers. So of the 192 students we were trying to get out, 40 are unaccounted for. Like nobody can find them, they've disappeared. Of the 192 students, one is a confirmed death at the airport. He died. He was a journalist. Of the 192 people alone, two have disappeared in that the families have no contact with them. So it's confirmed that they've disappeared after having contact with the Taliban. The women prosecutors have received word, the two women prosecutors disappeared, and they, after their homes were raided, and they received word that they are not safe. So what they are doing is they are alternating where they're staying among the neighbors. And we have video clips, audio footage, audio clips of instances where folks have been able to record what happens to their homes when they're raided. Like, they're at the neighbors and they see the Taliban convoys coming in, and women hearing what would happen to them if they're found and why they are targeted. And so really, really difficult stuff, like, you know, car chases, like someone trying to get home from work and being in a high-speed car chase with bullets flying, and footage of that, or footage of the bullets that missed them and hit the vehicles. So what's happening is very difficult, but the objective things that are communicated via media are all of those women's studies programs shut down. Women can no longer hold positions in government that have any sort of authority. Women-led households where folks had jobs are now going without. So the idea of a shortage of food and immediate relief, the requirement for immediate relief is really coming. Like, it's going to hit them very, very hard. People who worked in government hadn't been paid for 3 months. This is pre-August 15th. So they were owed wages. Those who were paid and received their salaries from the government, their bank accounts have been seized and they're no longer entitled to access those funds. So you've got masses of people who are professionals, who had a life, are now going without.
Hila,
sorry.
Hila, so I'm sorry to jump in.
I welcome it.
It reflects how much ground I hope to cover with you, and that we all want to hear from you. You know, given that you know, difficult, awful state of affairs in Kabul, and in the country, let me take you to, so what can we on screen and in this country do? What, and I know, as has been mentioned, thank you for preparing in advance of this conversation and this session a chart and a table that identifies how help can be provided through which organizations. And we will be posting that at the end of this session. It will be on screen, but I can imagine people are wondering initially, so how can we help? How can we try to show support?
Yeah, so you know, there's many things you can do. There are Afghans who are lucky enough to be resettled in Afghanistan. The government is caring for them and they're being brought here with very little. There's a number of funds that have been set up to support their resettlement efforts. The City of Toronto and the United Way set this one such fund up on the 31st, I believe. And so by visiting the United Way website, you can contribute there. There's a fleet of organizations doing humanitarian work on the ground. Some have charitable status and others don't. The ones that have charitable status, you would benefit from that tax receipt, right? But there's a fleet of them that do not, and they are doing wonderful work distributing food and other essentials on the ground. I'd be more than happy to share that as well with you. I was eerie about doing that because the ones that I have shared are Canadian charities that are certified. So there's things you could do to help on the ground. Now, I can share that the Canadian government, the current government, has pledged $50 million in humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. And having spoken to the conservative leadership, they want to maintain the Liberals' commitment from what they've said. And so the key would be to ensure that our government it uses, like, key strings need to be attached to that aid. The human rights violations going on in Afghanistan are just awful. And we do need to help, but we need to be careful about how we're helping to ensure that the funds are going to the right people. But I would be more than happy to share a list of the the ad hoc efforts. Like, my family set up a fundraising page because there's almost 1,500 individuals that are in contact with us. And, we're spending as much as possible, but we could do more if we had help. So I'd be more than happy to share those links. Children Without Borders is another organization that's formed by the Afghan Canadian Lawyers Association. It does not have charitable status yet, but we've managed to raise about $400,000, which is going directly to folks living in tents who are displaced as we speak. And so there's a lot that you can do. I will mention Lifeline Afghanistan briefly, if I may.
Yes, please. I was going to ask you next about that.
So given that we failed to get that group of people out, we quickly thought, what is our message to them? And our message was, if you are able to leave, we will find you. And how are we going to find you? We are going to try to get you here or somewhere safe. So Lifeline Afghanistan was essentially Meyer connecting me to Wendy Sukir at Ryerson University, who had that experience from the Syrian crisis. And I said, well, if you have the pipeline in place, please, revive that pipeline. Canadians from across the political spectrum want to help, and some want to donate funds, some want to do the actual settlement work with folks who are sponsored, but I am certain that I can raise the funds needed to help save some of those very, very vulnerable and targeted people. So Lifeline Afghanistan aims to do that. Through private sponsorship, it identifies folks who are in danger and have managed to leave the country and helps bring them to Canada.
Hila, thank you so much for that. The dedication and the smarts that you and those you work with have brought to sounding the alarm has been absolutely crucial in keeping this crisis in the forefront of our attention, and to government and to civil society, including to our congregation, and making this session possible. We will later be posting the information that Hila has assembled, which includes organizations that you can contribute to that will provide taxable donation receipts. And Hila, I'm sure that there will be many questions directed to you once the conversation portion of this session is over. But for your honesty and your determination and courage in all this, thank you, thank you. And next, I'm going to turn to Naomi. And Naomi, I'm tempted to go off script and ask you, listening to Hila, what are your immediate impressions?
Hila, thank you so much for setting the stage so effectively and so personally, and with such the lived experience really is critical to inform everything that we do. And unfortunately, you have that lived experience, and fortunately, you have that lived experience. Unfortunately, in terms of having to go through what you have gone through, but fortunately, because you're able to share those experiences and your current experiences with us and with many others, and to take that to the work that you do with your family, with other organizations, with Lifeline Afghanistan, Thank you so much for being here today and for doing what you do.
Thank you for that commentary, Naomi. And you, of course, have spent most of your professional career in government developing and overseeing immigration policy, and then moving on to the university sphere where you've conducted research leading to recommendations on immigration policy. Naomi, can you help fill in a context for us? Help us understand Canada's refugee system. How do refugees get to enter Canada? And is there anything in our past approach to refugees that can be helpful today?
Okay, thanks for the question, Meyer. I think first we probably have to just define the term refugee, because I think people use it in a whole variety of ways. Here in Canada, we are a signatory to the 1951 Geneva Convention on the Status of Refugees, and that definition has been imported into our legislation. And the definition of a refugee is pretty precise in that convention and in our legislation, which says that a refugee is someone who, and we're going to parse, I mean, you can spend days parsing this definition. I'm not going to do that, obviously, but a refugee is someone who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group or political opinion, is outside the country of his nationality and is unable, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country. So they're all different kinds of phrases to together form the definition of refugee. In short, refugees are people who are already outside their country and cannot return for fear of persecution. This obviously does not include Afghans who are still in Afghanistan. And therein lies one of the real difficulties. So we have this definition in our legislation, and there are basically 5 separate ways to come to Canada as refugees. The first is those who show up on our shores or at our borders, and they are seeking asylum within Canada. There's a very special process in place for those who need to go through a determination process to determine whether they meet all those parts of the definition of a convention refugee. And there's a arm's length board that does that kind of analysis and adjudication of their claim. We accept about 20,000 people for permanent residence through that system, through the inland refugee determination process from all over the world. And within that number, over the past decades, many Afghans have actually made it to our shores and have gone through the determination process and have been determined to be refugees and are now permanent residents and citizens in Canada. The second is since 2002, when we introduced our new immigration legislation, the Government of Canada has relied on the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to identify people who they think are most in need, those people who are vulnerable where they are and need to be resettled. They then make referrals to countries who are prepared to accept these refugees. Those refugees do not have to go through any further determination of their status. They are determined to be refugees by the UNHCR, and they normally arrive in Canada as what we call government-assisted refugees, or GARs, and they tend to be the most vulnerable people that the UNHCR has determined are in urgent need of resettlement. Those folks, we now admit about 11,000 GARs, government-assisted refugees, through that route, and they are helped by not-for-profit organizations like JIAS, particularly in their first year of settlement with income support and with support. Afghans have been part of the government-assisted refugee flow to Canada for decades, and particularly since Canada withdrew from Afghanistan in 2014. Number 3, in addition to those first two avenues, Our immigration legislation allows for the private sponsorship of refugees, both by what we call sponsorship agreement holders, and JIAS is a sponsorship agreement holder, and their constituent groups, and Taraky acted as a constituent group of JIAS for the sponsorship of Syrian refugees. But they're also, and those folks don't have to go through an individual determination if they are sponsored by sponsorship agreement holders. And those organizations can actually name the people that they want to assist. Those groups, and there are also groups of 5 individuals or community organizations that can get together to sponsor refugees. But now, those people, although they can be named by those smaller sponsorship groups, do have to go through some kind of determination process and have been recognized abroad before they come to Canada as refugees. Remember that, because that's an important piece for this current situation. Afghans have been sponsored, both by SAWs, sponsorship agreement holders, and by local groups before August 2021, before the most recent crisis. Number 4, there's a very small group of people called Blenda Visa Office Referred Refugees that come here in a kind of combo approach with a sponsor that provides financial assistance for half a year. The government provides financial assistance for half a year, and local community groups provide the social settlement support for the full year. So those are the people that can meet the definition that I explained before of being outside the country and available for sponsorship. What's really important is a 5th category, and the 5th category, the legislation allows for the minister of the day, as a result of a cabinet decision, to put into place special public policies for people who perhaps do not meet the individual definition because they may not yet be out of their country of permanent residence. They may still be in their home country, or there may be other nuances that make it difficult for them to meet the definition. The Minister of Immigration, by public policy, has done this for many other groups, and that's what we can learn from. That's how the Indo-Chinese came in. They were a designated class. That's how Salvadoran political prisoners came in, directly from the jails in El Salvador. That's how many of the Syrians came in, by being determined as a group to be refugees and not having to go through individual determinations. In mid-August, the government of the day, the Liberal government, decided to use public policy measures to include 2 particular groups. The first group were Afghans still in Afghanistan, or those who have just left Afghanistan, who had a significant and enduring relationship with the Government of Canada, either as helping out in the embassy, or in helping out the military, or working with the media, or working with Canadian NGOs and aid agencies in Afghanistan. That group is public policy number 1 that the government introduced in August to allow for expedited processing of people without them having to go through an individual refugee determination. The second public policy initiative deals with primarily the people that Hila has been talking about, really a very important group. These are people who are at particular risk today. Women leaders, human rights advocates, persecuted religious minorities, LGBTQ members of the community, journalists, and immediate and extended family members of all those groups. That second group can be outside of Afghanistan. Some of them are inside Afghanistan. We don't have any information yet from the government about what the processes will actually be. But we know that organizations like Hila's, families here in Canada, veterans associations made up of people who have served in the Canadian forces abroad, human rights organizations, people are collecting lists and lists and lists of people who fall into these categories that need help to be resettled to Canada, and we still don't have the actual details about how those people will actually come forward.
Naomi, I'm going to jump in for a moment now to say, you've not only answered the questions I've asked, I think you've reached forward to address the sort of next questions I was headed towards. You've given us such a rich context of Canada's immigration policies. I want to signal to everyone that we are almost certainly headed for overtime in this session. I'm pleased to report that all of the presenters have said that they can stay with us past 11:30. So, you know, we will not be closing the session then. But Naomi, you've given us like such a rich sense of the pathways into this country, what has happened previously in the past that can be hopeful as new directions. I want to ask you a last question before turning to Jodi, which is, so of course we're on the eve of a federal election, and before long there will be a new government and perhaps a new Minister of Immigration. I'm curious, what first signal or announcement or measure from the next government of Canada would give you confidence that Canada's on the right track, that we're going to make some headway in proactively and positively dealing with this challenge?
Okay, there is so much to do. There's so much to do. So first, let me say just a little bit about what Canada has already committed to, this government has committed to, and the Conservative government has also supported with some nuances. So first of all, Canada has committed to 20,000 new spaces, and that's important. It's over and above the target that was, announced by the government for all refugees. So 20,000 new spaces are being allocated to Afghan refugees. The Liberal government said that they would, in fact, double that if elected, up to 40,000. Of the 20,000 originally determined, 8,000 would be government-assisted refugees, but we don't know how the other 12,000 will be allocated. Canada has already also agreed to take 5,000 Afghan refugees that the United States airlifted out. So, and that will be part of the 20. The Conservative government has said, if they're elected, that they would eliminate the government-assisted refugee program completely, and it would be replaced only by privately sponsored refugees. That's potentially really problematic. Now, we don't know how they would do that, when they would do that, if there was a transition, but that is really fairly significant. In answer to a question, the Conservative leader said that he would match the 40,000 that the Prime Minister indicated in their electoral campaign, but there were no details, and that certainly was not in their platform. That is not in their written platform. It was just in response to a question. So about 3,000 people have arrived to date. It's very complicated. I'm not going to take the time to go in that. The system is in place. The system is working. They're being quarantined, they're getting vaccines, they're in hotels, they're going through all their medicals, they're going through all their checks. The system is working. We have a very robust settlement sector and refugee settlement sector, and that's working for the limited numbers that have come so far. I'm not going to give you all the complications or the demographics, but in a question, I'm happy to say who is actually coming in and what do we know about the ones that are here already. But to answer your specific question, I think Canada, first and foremost, has to really continue working with its other allies on the diplomatic front. And that's to encourage the Taliban to reopen the airport so that people with travel authorization from other countries who want to leave can leave safely from the airport. They also have to work with other allies to encourage all the neighboring countries to keep their borders open to fleeing Afghans who can actually make it overland to the borders, and to allow Canadian authorities to do the processing in those first countries of asylum. But there's incredible catch-up to do in terms of policy. All policy came to a halt during the election campaign because it's a caretaker government that can't tie the hands of an incoming government. So there are all kinds of things that have not yet landed from a policy perspective that need to land. If it's a liberal government, even if it's a minority government, it'll be a fairly quick process to get these policies done. If it's a new government, it'll take a long time. But some of the policies, for example, I think the 40,000 number has to be confirmed because right now it's only 20,000 for the resettlement. The process has to be clarified for that second group of vulnerable people, and how they're going to come forward, and how the lists that are being collected by organizations like Hila's can be the ones that actually come in. We have to streamline the rules and processes for private sponsorship the same way that we did for Syrians, taking off the caps for sponsorship agreement holder organizations, and eliminating the need for any kind of individual refugee determination process. We have to put a focus on family reunification to bring all the extended families of people already in Canada here. We have to streamline the transition process from temporary, many of the people coming in are coming in on temporary resident permits because it was so quick. We have to really expedite their status to permanent residency. We have to expedite the processing at the refugee board for Afghans who are now in the line seeking asylum. We have to put in place the necessary people and resources to do all this. And perhaps most importantly, and I'll end here, there really has to be increased aid for humanitarian responses, both to people still in Afghanistan and to those in neighboring first asylum countries. Pakistan cannot cope with more refugees coming across the border. They have millions in refugee camps now. So we have to help first asylum countries in coping with the refugees, and we have to help those people through not-for-profit organizations who are doing important work on the ground in Afghanistan so that people have the food and the safety and the security they need in Afghanistan. We can't forget those that are left behind. We can only bring to Canada a teeny portion of the people affected by this, and we have to put as much focus abroad as we do here in Canada. I'm going to stop there.
Naomi, thank you for, I think we're all catching our breath from the agenda you've set out for government, and I think we're all recognizing how important it is, the powerful and compelling advocacy policy work that you do. So Naomi, thank you for that. I want to remind everyone that we will be taking questions after my next conversation with Jodi Block. So if you have any questions, do go to the chat box and direct them to Danny Shield. And he'll be taking them forward to our presenters. But Naomi made reference to a robust settlement network that we are very fortunate to have in this country, and especially in this city. And one of the longest standing and very impressive such organizations is JIAS. And Jodi Block from JIAS, welcome, welcome. And we're so glad you could be with us, notwithstanding an internet outage in your neighborhood. And so you're joining us by alternate camera mode. Jodi, can I start by asking you, for many of us aren't familiar with the functioning and the nature of our immigrant settlement sector and agencies. Tell us a bit about JIAS.
On time, but I need to acknowledge and thank Hila and Naomi for your contributions. Hila, your what you've shared is incredibly powerful, and Naomi, you've incredible context and an overwhelming agenda, as Meyer stated. So, JIAS, touches on a couple of those little points, and we'll get into that a little bit. So, JIAS Toronto was founded almost 100 years ago. Actually, we'll be celebrating our 100th year anniversary in 2022 by the Jewish community to assist at that time Jewish refugees fleeing Eastern Europe, and over the century, JIAS has been a community and a community-funded agency assisting primarily Jewish refugees, and there were a lot of Jewish refugees over the last century, right? Lots of Jewish newcomers to the GTA, but as you probably all know, the number of Jews coming to Canada as refugees is relatively small. It's not by any stretch, significant in the scope of a world refugee crisis where, I think it's a low estimate now of 26 million refugees, and that's only people over the border of their country of origin. So 26 million refugees in the world, and like I said, I think that's a low estimate now. So JIAS Toronto is a settlement agency. We help newcomers once they come to Canada. We're also a sponsorship agreement holder, and this relates to what Naomi's been talking about in terms of private sponsorship. We're able to work with Canadian citizens to actually help bring refugees to safety, and we've worked with Taraky, as you know, on more than one sponsorship, I believe, and with lots of community groups out there, and we're committed both as a settlement agency and as a sponsorship agreement holder to supporting the resettlement of Afghan refugees in Canada. Now, and today we're a government-supported agency, so we still receive Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. We receive over 60% of our budget from IRCC, and we're part of a broader settlement sector. And while we're stating our commitment, I think it's important to recognize that as an agency called Jewish Immigrant Aid Services, we're not like the first stop in the case of Afghan refugee crisis, right? So I guess I want to start by saying that we have immediately reached out to partners. We sit around different tables. During COVID, we've actually been at a weekly meeting convened by the City of Toronto and United Way with agencies across the sector. And, immediately we reached out, for example, to the Afghan Women's Organization, which is one of our, an agency that we are in touch with about all kinds of issues across the sector, to express our support and to say, like, we're here to lend our support. And we already actually have a Dari-speaking settlement worker as part of our staff. And we're in the midst, with support from IRCC, of hiring a Pashto speaker as well, so that we really can lend meaningful settlement support. Naomi mentioned that there are already, I think it's about 30 here and are in quarantine hotels and elsewhere around the GTA. As it turns out, there was sort of a plan to resettle these people across the country, and I think a lot of them want to stay in Ontario, and that's something that is coming up in some of the meetings we're sitting in, where there will be a higher proportion than expected of Afghan refugees staying in Ontario. And so we sort of have an understanding that the settlement sector is going to be, I would say, I don't want to say overwhelmed, but this is going to be a significant effort. And so that's why we're gearing up and we're hiring the staff that's needed so that we can immediately take on some of that. And And just a small point of clarification, there's sort of a two-stop. There's two stops. There's like resettlement agencies. There are 34 of them, I believe, across the country that are like the first stop for refugees and can provide temporary housing and shelter. And then there are settlement agencies, and JIAS Toronto is a settlement agency, and we're usually the second stop. We're not meeting those first immediate needs, but we're preparing to meet the next phase of needs. So that's a few words about, I guess, our history and our place in this whole situation. With regards to private sponsorship, I'll just add that, as Naomi mentioned, the goal as a sponsorship, certain number of refugee sponsorship applications to submit to the government each year, and those tend to fill, right? There's a long waiting list. I mean, we're talking about a world refugee crisis. So the hope is really that, as in the case of the Syrian refugee crisis, the government opens up an opportunity to submit above and beyond those numbers. And we're prepared to do that. And we're also gearing up with staff in order to submit those applications.
Jodi, that is very, very helpful as on the ground direct support and integration assistance capacity that runs through JIAS. From your vantage point, what are you seeing that community groups, community organizations, or even just individuals are doing that can make for tangible support and assistance? So many of us on the screen now might be wondering, what could we do as small groups? What can I do as an individual? What are you seeing on the ground that's beneficial and helpful?
So before I answer that, I guess I just wanted to add with regards to Lifeline Afghanistan, as I said, it's important that we have those networks to share the kind of information you're asking about, because we're not all sort of on the ground. We're getting ready, but we're not on the very front line necessarily. And so it's through networks like Lifeline Syria, and there are other conveners. There was a call by OCASI, which is the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants. There are different forums that we're participating in that are helping to convey some of those needs. And so it's important to be around those tables and to be informed in order to be ready to help when the time comes. So I guess one of the things I want to say in response to your question is that one of the challenges, certainly for JIAS Toronto, but in the settlement sector generally, is that settlements is kind of a long game. So a crisis situation arises, like the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, and it really touches people, and people are moved to help, but they want to help now, right? And it's really a long game, and I got a glimpse of Hila's table that you're going to put up, which I think is really, really helpful. And I kind of want to reiterate that one of the things you can do to help is to stay committed, stay informed, be patient, and realize that the help isn't always needed from you today, but it's going to be needed for months and years in order to really support the settlement of Afghan refugees in Canada and for that to be successoming. So, right now there are, as I said, thousands of people who are in quarantine hotels and coming through the port of entry, and people want to help. So, some of that, a lot of what's being done at this point is sort of meeting like ins, but that's sometimes like it's complicated to have community engagement around that when the needs are so immediate. It has to happen like really quick, right? Like JIAS did send a shipment of items, including some clothing and toys, to one of the costly quarantine hotels this week. But, we didn't have the time to sort of make it a big community effort, although there are lots of people reaching out to us saying we have stuff. So we're staying in touch, both with like the people on the front lines and with the community, to be able to hopefully coordinate as those needs evolve, like that we actually meet whatever material needs there are, including, things as basic as like toiletries or toys for the kids, or, whatever is actually needed. So we're trying to be facilitate that kind of thing. But, down the road, when people are out of quarantine and starting to rebuild, you know, there are so many ways that Canadians can help to ease their transition to life in Canada. And you know, I know some of that's going to be up on the screen, but and many of you at Taraky know about that because you've been involved in private sponsorship, you've volunteered already through JIAS and other settlement agencies, and it's really I don't want to say hand-holding, but you know, there's research done by Professor Dr. Craig Smith from the University of Toronto's Department of Political Science, and he examines the effects of social networks on refugee integration and concludes that connecting newcomers to the community is a key defense against social isolation and a key defense against newcomer despair, but also maybe the single greatest measure of successful integration. So what we're looking at is for people to actually be there. You know, one of the reasons why private sponsorship is such a successful model is that built into it are, you know, Canadian citizens volunteering not only to provide the funding to support refugees, but saying, I'll be there. I'll be there to welcome at the airport, to take them to get their OHIP card and to help them register kids for school and to practice English and to go to the grocery store and to learn how to use public transit and all these day-to-day and open a bank account. I mean, all these day-to-day tasks, right? And so what we need to do for government assistance to refugees, and those are the people we're welcoming sooner and in the shorter term, is build those kinds of networks for all of them, right? So that's how Canadian citizens partly can help, is by volunteering through JIAS Toronto, through other agencies who are going to be welcoming these newcomers to the network in Canada, because that, as I said, is often like the single greatest indicator of successful integration. Am I going on too long?
No, Jodi, that's perfect, and it's a segue to me saying that we are going to before long post a contact list that includes the connection to make to JIAS if anybody is interested in that direct person-to-person kind of volunteering. A last quick question I would ask you is, in terms of private sponsorships, do you still have capacity if, for example, 5 people, 10 people on this call pooled together to want to provide the funds and the personal support to sponsor an Afghan refugee? Do you have such a slot available? Are there claims that can be made for private sponsorship allocations through JIAS?
Legitimate and important question. Naomi, I might ask you to throw me back a figure that you mentioned. I think you said of the, how many are government assisted refugees? Only like 8 or 12,000 of the total?
Well, right now they're saying 8,000 are government assisted, and the remainder of the 20 would be privately sponsored.
Right.
But there is no private sponsor. They haven't really
right
out yet because there are real barriers. I mean, the SAWs do not have enough spaces left in their allocation, and they have backlogs of other sponsorship applications. That's one of the policy things that has to be dealt with right away to give sponsorship agreement holders more spaces, and they have to get rid of the need for individual determinations so that groups of 5 people can sponsor a named refugee without putting that person through an individual determination as to whether they're a refugee. Without those 2 policy changes happening right away, the private sponsorship program is really on hold.
No, I appreciate that and those insights. I mean, the reason why I wanted you to throw me back that figure is because, you know, I really think the government is going to be relying on private sponsorship if they can get anywhere near right.
Jodi, I think your internet.
So it's true that we're waiting for the opening up of those spots, but will be spots opened up above and beyond.
Now
we can now. You were breaking.
Okay.
You were breaking up a bit.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just going to say that we are, and
Jodi, I'm going to jump in and say that, as I understand it, I think
we are anticipating that the government is relying on private sponsorship and is going to be opening up spots. So in the case of the Syrian,
I'm going to jump in, Jodi, and say that you are breaking
sorry,
up. You are breaking up a lot, but I think the gist of what you and Naomi are saying, I take to be that while there may be a current hold of some sort on the addition and processing of private sponsorships, that it's pretty clear that that is the pathway through which most of the future Afghan refugees will be coming into the country, and that it would not be, I'm going to add to that, therefore, I think it would not be premature for groups to begin to have conversations about their capacity to put together sponsorship, so that when the light switches from yellow to green, sponsorships are ready to go forward. So Naomi, thank you for that vote of confidence, and Hila and everyone for your nods on that. This has been an amazing and rich and moving conversation. I think we are ready now to go to questions from all of you in the audience. I believe the recipient and processor of all questions is our member Danny Shield, who himself also has been formidable in his dedication to refugee arrival and settlement in this country. So Danny, I'm not sure if you have an accumulated collection that you can direct to our presenters.
Okay, as usual, there are too many questions and too little time, but we knew that in advance. I think there's questions about the situation involving women, which I will come to in a moment. There's also another interesting question, because I'm not clear on this myself. If aid is going, some of the aid is going directly into Afghanistan, how are we able to determine that the aid is getting to the right places instead of being intercepted on the way through and going to the wrong people?
So that's a really good question. It depends on what aid we're talking about. So entities that have pre-established roots in Afghanistan, like Canadian charities such as the IDRF, have systems in place to be able to receive and distribute this aid. Before, they would do things like build hospitals and schools and so forth. And so they use their pre-existing channels to do so. On the ad hoc basis, where a group of random people want to help, they're using this very interesting system called the Hawala system, where essentially you give funds to, you know, the local shopkeeper here who has a very trusted cousin there. And so by working with these informal networks, you actually get money handed to your contact person on the ground. And what's different now than before, than 20 years ago, is the tremendous impact that the internet and social media plays. So you can trace your funds and contributions. You can determine whether the money is being received by the proper person or the appropriate person and being distributed for the appropriate cause. But the aid that I was talking about would be the government's commitment, right? The 50 million or so for aid. What we wouldn't want to see is, so what we want to see is what Naomi had suggested, right? It go to organizations that have pre-established roots versus the Taliban regime for distribution.
So if I could just add, you know, the World Food Program, which is part of the UNHCR, is a very, you know, trusted organization that deals with this all the time. they also give tax receipts if people are interested in that. IDRF, as Hila said, is a fabulous organization, and they have all that infrastructure to make sure that it goes where it's supposed to go.
Thank you. Many questions about the status of women, the problems of professional women, which of course Hila you alluded to earlier. One of our people sent me a story this morning about a group of 41 women, most of whom were part of the Afghani cycling team, who managed, with Canadian help of the Canadian government and with the help of Israelad, an Israeli NGO, to get to, I believe it was United Arab Emirates, and who are now awaiting transportation to Canada once they're all processed and cleared. And apparently CJA and JIAS are already in touch with with these people and this group, and plan to help them once they get to Canada. So I guess, Jodi, a natural question to you is, do we know any more details? And is this the kind of natural follow-up that a synagogue-based group like ourselves should be looking at, because these people are in touch with the Jewish community, and the Jewish community can continue to help them once they arrive in Canada? Jodi? No, I can't hear you. You voted.
Jodi, unmute.
Thank you. I needed an invitation to unmute. Thanks.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So absolutely, I think before I was trying to convey that we really do believe private sponsorship is going to happen. Obviously, that takes time, right? So that's further down the road. The whole process can take close to a year, et cetera. But in terms of the people that Danny's mentioning, we are anticipating and hoping to welcome that group, for example, but also through our network of partner agencies that are already on the front lines, we are anticipating doing settlement work in the really near future. So we're really hoping to start welcoming people soon, and we do need volunteers to help with that kind of day-to-day support. You know, there's a certain amount, the best formula is to work with a settlement agency and with volunteers. You know, private sponsors without a settlement agency behind them can be stronger, and a settlement agency without volunteers can be stronger. So we need people in the community to help welcome, to help with day-to-day navigating Canadian systems and getting to know surroundings and rebuilding networks, and 100%. So we're looking for volunteers who are willing to be on standby for when that time is coming, which I don't think is so far off, but it's not necessarily today. And, you know, in terms of sponsorships, also, we're eager to hear from people who are interested in going down that path. And we're also going to be opening up, I'm not sure if it's actually in our website yet, but like a sponsorship fund, so that if you can't commit, you know, the 20, 30,000 plus that's required to do an entire sponsorship, you can contribute towards sponsorship. And that, you know, we're not necessarily, there are different models, there are different ways to do it. Sometimes the money comes from one place or one group of people, and sometimes the money can be collected on a larger scale, and then, you know, you match with the people who are willing to be on the application and really do that settlement piece. So we're looking at all of those things, and we're looking for people who are interested in supporting either through private sponsorship or through donations or as volunteers, because we're really hoping, as Danny is suggesting, to welcome Afghan refugees on the front line very soon.
Just going to jump in to remind people that in the chat box, I believe, is the information about the website of JIAS and the email address you could reach out to if you're interested in some form of volunteering through JIAS. Danny, back to you. Sorry for that.
Okay, I think that summarizes most of the questions. And we noticed we're time-wise, we're 13 minutes overtime already. I think that we all, in these questions, have to understand that there is a lot of information which is very early on, and we will not be able to digest it all. People are asking me some detailed questions about how they can help, but we just don't know all the answers yet. I think associations like Lifeline Afghanistan is going to be able to help us, as the entire Afghani community in Toronto will be able to help us with directing us to the right places. So Hila, I think it's very, very wonderful that your group has opened up a Lifeline Afghanistan, that Lifeline Afghanistan is a visible part of saving, of rescuing, and of settling people in Canada. And I think most of the other people are asking how and when, and I think we've answered most of those questions to our best of ability, knowing there's more to come down the road.
I know that Naomi wants in,
Yes.
And Naomi, I'll give you the floor in a minute. I just want to follow up from Danny to say that when we put up Hila's chart, and maybe it would be an idea, Kathy, if you can, just to give people a quick view of it now. It will come back and stay on after the session. It provides a comprehensive category listing of different ways in which people can help. And in the last column of donate, it identifies organizations, including some in Afghanistan itself, to whom providing humanitarian support there on the ground that can help. I will say also that if any congregants are interested in working further on this question of how can we help, so please send me an email message just to let me know that you're interested in being part of that discussion and effort. And my email also will be is up on the contact list that is in the chat box. So we are certainly expecting that this event will lead to a cluster of congregants coming together to try to put meat on the bones of how can we help. Naomi, over to you.
Just that chart is great, Hila. I would just want to add a few things about what people can do as individuals or as groups within the community. I think it'll be really important, and Hila mentioned this, speak to your newly elected MP. I mean, Monday we will know who your new MPs are. Even though the election is over, the work is just beginning for whoever is elected. And speak to them about the issue, and speak to them about getting all those policy decisions made as quickly as possible so that movement can continue going forward. Clearly reach out to the settlement organizations, but remember the Afghan organizations in particular, because they will have perhaps an additional perspective about what kind of help is necessary. And I would encourage you to reach out to them in particular. I think the role of the media is really important to keep this front and center. If any of you are good with the pen and want to do letters to the editor, or want to do op-eds, or want to encourage continued media coverage, both in terms of what's happening abroad and what's happening here in Canada, human interest stories they're always looking for, but continued media attention I think is really important. We're a very active group of people, and we are part of many different organizations. You may want to organize sessions like this in other organizations of which you are a part or affiliated, and invite the media to those further information sessions like this one. Yes, start organizing a potential sponsor group so you're ready to hit the ground running. And there's lots of help online from the Refugee Sponsorship Training Program project, or from Lifeline Afghanistan to help. And there are members of the congregation like myself who have been involved before, and at JIAS who can help. Most importantly, in terms of what hasn't been mentioned yet, housing is the biggest immediate issue of concern. These are many of the people that are coming in to date are large families. Large families are hard to house. If any of you have any access or any knowledge of potential housing opportunities, please make them aware. Let JIAS know. Let Lifeline Afghanistan know about potential housing opportunities. If you have employment opportunities, you may be business owners or involved in business activities, or you can get your employer to make some offers. A lot of the people coming in now, because of their Canadian connections, many of the families, one person speaks English at least. So they are way ahead of the game. They are educated people. They have really good work experience. Think of people who have worked for the Canadian Embassy, or worked for the Canadian military, or are interpreters, or work for human rights organizations. These people can start working very, very quickly. If you are part of an organization or a business where you can donate not just money, but goods and services, think about what you and your businesses can contribute. And I'm going to end on what I think is probably the most critical is remember the people abroad and donate to the international organizations, because we will never be able to bring to Canada more than a drop in the bucket. And Joseph Cage, who was my mentor, who was one of the first executive directors and leading lights in terms of JIAS and Jewish immigration, and involved in many, many refugee movements, said, don't worry so much of the people who come here. Get them here. The most important thing is to provide them with the safety. Other things will fall into place. We're a very supportive community. We're a very supportive country. People, once they arrive, will actually be well taken care of, and you can volunteer and make it even better. It's the people abroad that are really at risk that we have to think about. Let's do both, but don't forget the ones back home.
Naomi, thank you for that really important pulling of threads together for us. So we are now at the end of our session. I have a few words of appreciation to convey, first and foremost, to all of you who have been with us this morning. I'm told it's a gorgeous day out there. At some point, I might make it out there. But to all of you who have been with us for virtually an hour and a half, thank you. Our panel has been superb, so thoughtful, insightful, compelling, moving. Thank you, Hila. Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Jodi. And there's a surprisingly large team of people behind the scenes who have put so much sweat and effort into making this event possible. A special shout out to Kathy Sikora and Marianne Levitsky at the controls, who gave us so much advice and confidence that this event could go forward, and it has so seamlessly. There's a team of people back at our synagogue office who, in the midst of the busiest part of our calendar, our high holy days, were unfailingly helpful with advice and suggestions to our president, David McKee. I see you on screen, David and Elaine, thank you. And in the office, to Danielle and Yaron, who were really marvelous, on top of everything else being there for us. In a moment, those slides are going to go up, but I want the last voice we hear before we bid ourselves farewell to go to Hila. Hila, are there any last thoughts, last words you want to leave us with?
Thank you, Meyer and group. I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't say that the Afghan diaspora has mobilized better this time than ever before. a community that's unlike the Jewish community. We are inherently fractured. But the rise of the Taliban has brought everybody together, and it's unfortunate that our shared trauma is bringing us together. But I won't end with a bleak remark. I'll say that I have met more.
You just had it up.
I have met more helpers across the political spectrum, more activists, Canadian organizations, businesses, developers, I mean, you name it, in the last 3 weeks, all wanting to help and all recognizing that this is a tremendous moment for Canadians. We must do something, because to not do something would mean that we have lost Canadian lives in vain, and we have spent a tremendous amount of money trying to develop Afghanistan over the last 2 decades. So if you are somebody on the political right, we need to protect our investment. If you are someone in the political center or left, it's the really right thing to do, and we will reap the rewards of the actions we take today.
Hila, thank you for those words and for everything you are doing the other 16 hours of your day when you're not at your work desk. So many thanks to everyone who's been part of this, and this conversation will continue. For Darchei Noam congregants and anyone on the screen, if you'd like to be part of our congregation's effort to pull together initiatives, send me an email, please. And about to go on screen as we bid each other a good rest of the day is the chart of ways of showing support that Hila has provided us with. So thank you so much to everyone for being with us, and bravo to our presenters. You were terrific.